Hello, welcome to Turning 18 in Virginia, What Individuals with Disabilities Need to Know, a workshop for families and professionals. My name is Tammy Burns, and I am a family support specialist at PEDC. When children turn 18, they have reached what we call the age of majority. They have all the rights and the responsibilities of an adult. Parents no longer have the legal authority they had the day before the young adult turned 18. As you probably know, turning 18 is a big deal for all individuals. An 18-year-old, as I said, is legally considered to be an adult in Virginia. Therefore, when your child turns 18, he or she is the person that is able to make legal, financial, medical, and educational decisions in his or her life. For some individuals with disabilities, this will not be an issue, but others may find they need some support. Usually when I share this particular information and I'm in person with families, I can see many families have a shocked look on their face. And as a parent of 3 adults myself, I know that I oftentimes feel like all of my adult children need some support in making decisions, and they don't oftentimes make the decisions that I would want them to make. But remember, this turning 18 age of majority gives them the legal right and authority to make those decisions and have options. That doesn't mean that they must do it without support. In fact, many people get support. Most 18-year-olds and even older people like me seek support in making some decisions. For example, I seek out a CPA to help me with my taxes each year. And I also ask for my spouse's opinion on big decisions that I have to make. We as parents don't always agree with the decisions our adult children make, but this is not about agreement at this moment. This age of majority is talking about the right that individuals have to make those decisions when they are a legal adult. So in this workshop, we are going to talk about a list of things that parents, guardians, and even individuals with disabilities may want to consider when the individual is turning 18 here in Virginia. Everything I share will not be applicable to everyone. Everyone will not need to do all of these things because each person needs different supports and each person may qualify for different supports. I also want to start by mentioning the difference between eligibility and entitlement, because this can often be confusing when moving from the childhood world to the adult world in those services. When your child is in the public school system, there were certain services and supports that they are entitled to as a student who receives special education services, for example. If your child had an IEP and they needed a service according to that IEP, then they were entitled to receive it. There were no waiting lists for those services. And the local school system served as the single agency that coordinated those educational services. The adult service system is much different. The single point of service coordination does not really exist in adult services. In fact, as a parent of an adult, I often find myself being that single point of coordination and serving as a case manager or service coordinator in some instances for my son. The adult service system, for the most part, is not that entitlement-based program like we talked about special education. Most post-secondary employment and related service agencies have their own eligibility systems that must be met prior to acceptance into that program. So each type of adult service, as I'm saying, often has its own eligibility criteria that's specific to that agency, and it may be different for another agency. So just to be clear, just because a child received special education services, or just because an adult has this label or receives this adult service, does not mean that they will also receive every other adult service. In addition, in the adult services world, there are often waiting list for many of the services that we're going to talk about. So this workshop today, I'm going to provide a very brief overview of the things that families may need to consider before their loved one with a disability turns 18 in Virginia. This will be a tip of the iceberg overview. Please consider reaching out to PTSI or attending our other trainings to get more specific information on each of these topics that I will bring up, as many of these are a workshop in and of themselves. And remember, PTSI is not a legal entity, and we do not give legal or financial advice. So on some of these things, it's going to be very important to contact an expert in those areas. I will also share that PTSI has a resource document that has each of these things that I'm going to mention today on that document, along with more information and a link to take you to the agency that provides that service. We also have a lot of fact sheets that delve into these services a little more and give more information. So always remember, you can contact PTSI for more information on these things. So I'm going to start today with the first few things that I share are going to be things that are applicable to all individuals turning 18, even those without disabilities for the most part. The first one that I'll talk about is medical providers. For all individuals approaching 18, you will want to talk to your child's pediatric providers about transitioning to adult physicians and providers. Many pediatric providers will stop seeing a person once they are adult age. For some, that means age 18, and some other practices will go until the person's 21st birthday. Sometimes you may find a pediatrician or a pediatric specialist who is willing to see your child for longer. But we would say that oftentimes it's good to transition anyway to an adult provider who focuses on adult-specific issues. And in addition to that, oftentimes pediatricians or pediatric providers cannot admit adults into a hospital setting if needed. If you're like me, your child has probably had many of the same physicians for most of his or her life. And many of those have played a very key role in that child's life. I will tell you that it will take time to talk to others, other parents, other friends, find good recommendations that will work for your son or daughter's needs, and to find a physician who takes your current medical insurance. I thought this would be one of the things that would be easier in all the switching over from the child world to the adult world. But I will say this has been one of the hardest for my families. We have had lots of visits with doctors where we've gone to meet the doctor to determine if they would be a good fit, and have found it very difficult to find doctors that understand my son's disability and that take his medical insurance at the same time. So I would encourage you to start having some of those conversations pretty early. Another thing that every male must do when they turn 18 is that he must register with the Selective Services, even if he has a disability and regardless of the nature of that disability. So let me say that again. If you have a male child, whether he has a disability or not, he must register for Selective Services. At this moment, there is not a requirement for females to do this, but there has been some discussion lately about possibility of changing that. Disability may end up disqualifying your child from the service or from the draft if the draft is reinstated. However, it is still the law that he register. Another important thing, before your child turns 18, you will need to make sure he or she gets a valid form of identification. Our world requires ID for so many things: travel, doctor's visits. You know, if you go to the doctor, they ask you for your ID and your insurance card. It's required for banking, for working. You need a legal form of ID to be employed, for example. Formal identification is necessary in our world for adults. This could take the form of a passport, a driver's license, or a DMV issued photo ID, which is a great option for individuals who are not currently driving or who may not drive at all. When you get that form of ID, you need to also make sure to keep those things up to date by renewing them throughout the adult years. My son does not drive and has a DMV issued photo ID. It was not too difficult to get. I think the worst part was having to wait at the DMV. But right now, as you may be aware, DMV is making appointments because of our COVID-19 situation in our country. And so that may make this a little easier. Pre-COVID, many educators that I know had DMV actually come to the class for their students. And some had even done a field trip as a class to DMV for everyone to go ahead and get a DMV issued photo ID. Another thing to be aware of around ID is as of October 2021, and that's the current date unless that changes, your child and you will need a real ID card, what's called a real ID card, or a passport in order to travel within the United States on an airline. So in the image you see on the screen, you'll see that is a real ID driver's license because it has that star in the top right-hand corner. Those are going to be required at some point. Right now the date is October 2021 to be able to travel on an airline within the U.S. To get a real ID, there are specific and additional requirements that you must bring with you to get that form of ID that you'll want to make sure to check out the DMV website to make sure you bring the right things with you for your visit to the DMV. Another thing that all individuals who turn 18 have the right to do is the right to register to vote. Once someone turns 18, he or she can register to vote in many places, including the DMV, public libraries, the Department for Aging and Rehabilitative Services, Centers for Independent Living, and you can even do that online. One thing to note is for individuals that their family has gone to court and been granted legal guardianship, sometimes that right to vote is discussed in that court procedure and may or may not remain a right that that individual has. Another very important thing for all individuals as they're approaching 18 is opening a bank account. Bank accounts can be individual or joint, meaning you have that account with a parent, a guardian, a spouse, or someone else. Having a bank account can help some individuals begin to establish credit and manage their money. A joint bank account can protect the person with a disability who cannot manage his own or her own money without help. A joint bank account can help prevent rash spending, and it can also help prevent financial exploitation. By having two people in the account, a person with a disability is less likely to be taken advantage of by people who want to borrow money or ask for financial gifts. Some additional features may include a preset limit on debit or credit cards or dual signatures on checks. The helper that has that joint account with them can also help monitor the account and track spending. One caveat is parents need to be aware if you are on a joint bank account with your child, then you are also legally responsible for overdrafts and those kind of things that may happen. There are some legal alternatives if your adult child is unable to manage his or her own finances, which includes things like serving as your child's representative payee or fiscal conservator. The Social Security Administration appoints representative payees, and a court appoints fiscal conservators. Parents can serve as both of those things if needed. I also, when just talking about bank accounts, want to point out for services and supports such as Social Security income, SSI, or community-based Medicaid waivers or Medicaid, there are income limits to qualify for those supports. And it's important to know, I think a good rule of thumb is to remember the number $2,000. And if an individual with a disability has more than $2,000 in a checking or savings account in their name, or an investment account in their name other than an ABLE account, they may be at risk for not qualifying for these types of benefits like SSI and Medicaid waivers. So be sure to know the rules for those programs when you're opening that bank account. The rest of these things that I'm going to share are very dependent on support needs of an individual and dependent on that individual meeting eligibility requirements as someone approaches the age of majority, remembering that some of these things will be appropriate for your individual and some of them may not. One thing you want to consider is to think about your child exiting high school. If your child has an IEP, verify with your child's school case manager or school counselor the anticipated graduation or exit date from high school. In fact, this is something that should be indicated on the IEP document itself. If your child is not working toward a standard or advanced standard diploma, they can choose to remain in school up through their 22nd birthday. Students with IEPs working toward a standard or advanced diploma must exit school upon completion of that diploma or by their 22nd birthday, whichever comes first. So an example of this, I'll give you a couple of examples to try to help make that clear. If your child has an IEP and is not working toward that standard or advanced standard diploma, so maybe they're working toward an applied studies diploma, that child can stay in school through their 22nd birthday and can continue receiving educational services. If the child turns 22, let's say in October, that child can remain in school for the rest of that school year because they're getting that, what the state calls an applied studies diploma. I will also mention here that the applied studies diploma is not an official diploma that's recognized by the federal government or by many entities, which is why that individual can stay in school longer. If your child has an IEP or not and receives a standard or advanced standard diploma, when they receive that type of diploma, they are finished with high school. So it's important to talk to your child's school counselor or IEP team to try to determine when your child will be exiting high school and to plan accordingly. Another thing to know about, and again, this is for students who do have an IEP, is something called transfer of rights. Virginia school divisions transfer all educational decisions and rights under IDEA, so that means for IEPs, goes from the parent or guardian to the student at age 18. Now, that does not mean that the parent cannot stay involved in their child's education, but it does mean that those rights on that IEP and the right to sign that IEP move to that student, unless that student has been determined to be incapable or incompetent of making those decisions. Now, some students will need assistance in making those decisions and others will not. But that student does have those rights, those overall rights to that IEP once they turn 18, unless other things are put into place. An example of other things that can be put into place are things like guardianship, educational power of attorney, or educational representative. All of those things are talked about in a document that the Virginia Department of Education has called Transfer of Rights. And that can be found on their website, or you can contact PT and we can send that to you. as well as Pizzi has some great fact sheets around the diplomas that we just talked about earlier and these types of decisions that need to be made or may not need to be made depending on your student. Another thing to consider, you may want to decide, look into if your child should apply for Social Security Income, SSI. SSI is a federally funded, needs-based disability program for adults and children, which provides monthly cash benefits. The person who is applying, the applicant, must meet disability and income requirements to qualify. If the person is applying before age 18, the income requirements have to do with not just the individual's, but the family's income and assets. But once a person turns 18, Social Security only looks at that individual's income and assets. So many students that I know don't qualify for SSI as a child, not because of their disability side of things, but because of the income side of things, since the family's income is being considered. But once that individual turns 18, the family's income is no longer looked at, and that individual oftentimes, if they meet the disability requirement, will qualify. So it is important to understand SSI and to look at that, especially as the individual turns 18. Another thing to consider as your child is approaching 18 is whether he or she should apply for Medicaid health insurance at your local Department of Social Services. Medicaid is an insurance program funded by the federal and state government for eligible low-income adults, children, pregnant women, seniors, and people with disabilities. In addition, Virginia has implemented federal Medicaid expansion, so more people are actually eligible to receive Medicaid than in years past. So your local Department of Social Services is where that Medicaid is housed, or you can check on Cover VA on the internet. Another important piece here as we're talking about health insurance is, as a parent, you want to check your current health care coverage as your child approaches 18 to see how long your adult child can remain on your coverage, and verifying those aspects of your health insurance. If your child isn't already receiving services through a Medicaid waiver, again, this is different than Medicaid health insurance. But if your child is not already receiving services through a Medicaid waiver or is not currently on the waiting list for a Medicaid waiver, you may want to look at and decide if your child should be screened for one of the Medicaid waivers here in Virginia. Virginia's Medicaid waivers enable individuals with developmental and related disabilities to receive the services and supports they need at home or in the community. There are two basic waiver types that individuals with disabilities may qualify for in Virginia. There's the Developmental Disabilities Waivers, which is called the DD waivers, and there's the Commonwealth Coordinated Care Plus waiver, or CCC Plus. Those waivers have different eligibility requirements, and both have the income and resources requirement that we talked about. Again, Pizzi can help you navigate some of these things, as well as the ARC of Virginia is a great resource for Medicaid waivers in Virginia. If your child is on the wait list at this point, you will want to make sure to contact your waiver case manager when your child turns 18 and talk about how turning 18 affects their priority level on that wait list. Another thing to consider is advanced health care directives or power of attorneys. An advanced directive is a written document in which people clearly specify how medical decisions affecting them, and can be both physical and mental health, are to be made if they are unable to make them, and to authorize a specific person to make those decisions for them. Understanding that the person providing this directive or power of attorney must be competent to provide that. Many hospitals have blank forms, and you can even download forms off the internet. And here in Virginia, the Disability Law Center of Virginia can help people with disabilities who want advance directives. These kind of things should be kept on file with physicians, maybe even a hospital if you use a specific hospital, and should certainly be on file with the person who is the power of attorney or who is named in the Advanced Healthcare Directive. I will say here, just to point out that in my own life, I have found this is also really valuable if you have adult children that don't have a disability, or with your spouse, for example. But I have an adult son who went out of state to college, and before he left, he signed over a medical power of attorney naming me in that power of attorney so that I would be able to make decisions, medical decisions, or even hear about what's going on with him medically if he is unable to tell me. And as a parent, I was really concerned about what would happen if he were out of state and was in the hospital and unable to tell me what was going on. And I wanted to be able to call in, while I'm on the road driving to that hospital out of state. But I wanted to be able to call in and get information on his well-being and how he is doing. And so we went on the internet, and he filled out power of attorney, medical power of attorney documents for that very reason. So it's important documents to know about, even without having a child with a disability, but specifically can be helpful when you have an adult child with a disability. Another service or a provider to know about are vocational rehabilitation and employment supports. You want to consider and look into connecting with either the Virginia Department for Aging and Rehabilitative Services, which is known as DARS, or the Virginia Department for the Blind and Vision Impaired, which is abbreviated DBVI. These agencies provide services like vocational assessments and employment supports. Also check into and look at their career pathways for individuals with disabilities, their career pathways academies, and their pre-employment transition services to students with disabilities who are in middle school or high school. If your child is in school, your school can help make the connection with DARS or DBVI, or you can contact them directly. There is eligibility criteria to be served by these agencies. And again, they provide employment benefits, employment connections, and can help with those types of services. They also can provide employment benefits counseling for individuals who are working or want to work and receive things like SSI or Medicaid or Medicare or Medicaid waivers. That is an important benefit that these agencies can provide to help someone understand how are those things affected if I work, and can be very critical in helping people with disabilities to work and continue to keep those benefits that they already are receiving. Another thing to know about is Wilson Workforce and Rehabilitation Center, also known as WWRC, to see if their services might be appropriate for your child. WWRC is in Fishersville, Virginia, and is a campus-like setting that individuals may go to. It offers training and rehabilitation services to people with disabilities to enable them to re-enter the workforce and live more independently. It provides a variety of employment services, including things like life skills transition, career guidance, vocational guidance, school to work transition services, vocational evaluations, pre-vocational work adjustment, assistive technology training, community-based internships, and job-seeking skills. Another really awesome thing that WWRC provides is a driver's education course for individuals with disabilities, including a simulator, which is a really awesome way to practice driving and not being on the road. There are admission criteria related to obtaining services at WWRC, which does include medical and behavior requirements. But it is a great resource here in Virginia, and I encourage you to check that out. Excuse me. Another thing you want to consider is to investigate independent housing opportunities that are here in Virginia, such as the Housing Voucher Program, which is available to those 18 and older who receive waiver services or who are on the waiver wait list. Again, this is something that might be useful for some, but maybe not all individuals. If your child has a Medicaid waiver, your child's Medicaid waiver case manager can help you with exploring different types of housing, including apartment living, supported living, supervised housing, and more. The housing vouchers that I mentioned are managed by DBHDS. Again, those letters are DBHDS, Virginia's Developmental Behavioral Health Services, and they will be able to tell you more about those. Or again, you can contact PC to know more about housing vouchers for individuals with disabilities. Individuals who are pursuing an employment goal that require college may want to look at, or that require further education, may want to look at some of these options. Things like certificate programs, technical trade schools, community college, AmeriCorps, four-year college, or programs for those individuals who did not receive a standard or advanced standard diploma, such as ACIT, Mason Life, and Longwood Life. These options are available in Virginia, and there are individuals with disabilities who participate in all of these. If an individual is going to go to college, 4-year or 2-year, one of the things you'll want to know about and to check into is college disability services. Your school guidance counselor may know about those at different college options your child is considering, or you can reach out to the college itself or look on their website. Remember, if your child has an IEP in high school, that there are no IEPs in college. However, accommodations must be made in college for individuals under the Section 504 Rehabilitation Act. The individual must qualify for those, and they have to request those services. They don't just come automatically. Some possible services that I've seen provided in college could be things like accommodations, mentors, relaxation techniques and strategies, resources, and team support. As you've already figured probably throughout this presentation, we have covered some pretty interesting and complex issues and decisions. And one of the things you may want to do, because some of these decisions you will be making for your individual turning 18 or helping them make are very complex, you may want to consider making an appointment with an elder law attorney or an attorney who is experienced with disability laws and rights to discuss alternatives and options for future planning for your child and your family. I have listed a few here that you can see. The Virginia Academy of Elder Rights Attorneys, they actually have a search place on their website where you can search for elder law attorneys, and you can put in your address and it will give you ones located near you. And those are attorneys who are specifically work in the realm of things like special needs trust and power of attorney documents, as well as guardianship and those type of things. The Disability Law Center of Virginia is also able to help navigate some of these things that we're talking about. And then there's a website called Find Special Needs Answers that has some great information on it as well. One of those decisions that you may want to consider discussing with an attorney is those things around decision making and how decisions are made by this individual. Advanced care directives, and power of attorney we spoke of in terms of healthcare were mentioned earlier, but some individuals end up needing more assistance and different levels of support. So here are some options that may want to be considered. full or limited guardianship, which a guardian is a person appointed by a court who is responsible for the personal affairs of a person that the court terms incapacitated. That is the court's word that they use, and say that the person is incapacitated and is unable to make those decisions that need to be made in their lives. An individual under full guardianship sometimes, most often actually, loses the right to vote, the right to enter into contracts, that right to marry, and the right to drive, the ones we were talking about that happen with age of majority. Guardianship may be appropriate for some individuals, and the court would determine that person is incompetent and to make those decisions in their life, and so they would appoint a guardian. A limited guardianship can also be something that a family looks at, and that's where the individual keeps rights in some areas, and the guardian is only there and responsible for other areas. So there might be a limited guardianship around financial, or a limited guardianship around healthcare, for example. So those kind of things are determined in a court by a judge. Parents file a petition, or someone files a petition to be the guardian, and that goes through a court process. Those processes can be very costly, and as I said, does require a court appearance. So it's something to know that before you get into that. There are alternatives to guardianship, some supported decision-making alternatives. An alternative is a legal tool, social service, natural support, community resources, or government program that can help and be in place of full guardianship and help someone make decisions. Some of those options are things like powers of attorney, living wills, representative payee, which we spoke of earlier, and again, that natural support person that may be in place, like a family member or friend. These are very big decisions and often very complex, and again, we do recommend that you seek out the advice and help of a qualified attorney when you're looking at these types of areas. Another area, again, that we recommend you seek that attorney's help with is the area of estate planning. If you believe that your adult child is going to use Medicaid, SSI, or some of those other government benefits, you may want to talk to an attorney about something called a special needs trust or an ABLE account. These tools are there to help protect that person's Medicaid waiver and SSI, for example, so that funds left to them may be left in a special needs trust or ABLE account and don't count as income and resources for that person, so that they're not disqualified financially for those services that have those financial requirements. You also, while you're there or while you're talking about those type of things, you can talk to an attorney, that same elder law attorney, about wills and trusts for you and your own spouse, to plan for things about what happens when you may no longer be around, upon your death, getting some things in place. I know as a family member or a parent of a young man with autism, it makes me feel better to know that I have some things planned out and laid out, and I feel better about knowing that those things are taken care of for my son. Another thing that you may want to know about and consider doing is to create a letter of intent. As I know, as parents, it is hard to think about or even imagine our children outliving us, but that's a very likely possibility, and it's important to plan for that. A letter of intent is not a legal document like a trust or a will, and it's not something you need an attorney for. It's more like a personal letter where you, as the parent or the guardian, shares important information about your child and share your wishes for how you would like that person to be cared for when you're no longer here. A letter of intent can accompany those things like a special needs trust, or it can just be something you have. You can find all sorts of templates for this on the internet, And I would, highly recommend looking at this. It does take a while to complete because it covers a lot of areas. Things like address, health insurance name and information on long-term services and supports like Medicaid waivers, who's the case manager, how do you contact them, names and contact info on key people like relatives, friends, attorneys, financial information, bank accounts, investment accounts, trust information. But you also include things like personal things. What does your child like to eat? I know, for example, my son, it's just a weird thing, but he wants to wear a certain t-shirt color each day of the week. And for him, that really matters. And so I would want someone to know that. So on Friday, he wears blue, and on Tuesday, he wears white. And just so someone understands that, to help make his life a little happier. You'd want to talk about things like behavior management, favorite foods, activities, and also your wishes. Do you wish, how do you wish your child's living arrangement to look? How do you want them to do certain religious things or certain holiday rituals or customs that your family may have? How do you want to be able to communicate, as I say, and communicate the things that are in my brain out on paper so other people have that information. This is something that once you get it done, you have the bulk of the work done, but you do have to keep updated as things change. All the time things change, and so you want to update it. I try to make it a point to change it when time changes. We move to spring forward or fall back, so that I just kind of look through my letter of intent and update that at that point. You also want to make sure that someone else has a copy other than you. So if you have an attorney, share it with your attorney, put it with your future planning documents. We have ours actually on a Google shared document, so I can update it easily, and everybody gets the updated version all the time. And I share that with my relatives and my spouse, and so everybody has a copy of that. But a letter of intent can be very valuable to communicate those things about your child that aren't captured in legal documents. I've shared a lot of things today, but I would say most importantly, just get started. Take one of these things before your child turns 18. Start with one and move forward. Plan early. Educate yourself on how to prepare for adulthood before you get there if you can. And if you're already there, then start with one thing and move forward. It's never too late to start. Remember, you can always contact Pizzi if you have questions. Here is our contact information. We have fact sheets on a lot of this information that I have shared that will give you more information, and we do trainings on a lot of this information as well. We do have a resource document that outlines the things that I have shared today and gives you links on how to access those agencies or providers. Just remember that Pizzi is here to help, and we would encourage you to contact us with questions that you have. And I'll also mention that Pizzi has a wonderful training that we do called Transition University, and I would encourage you to check that out before your child turns 18 if you can, if not after. But it is full of information and dives very deeply into each of these things that we have talked about. So I do encourage you to look at Pizzi's Transition University as well. Thank you, and I hope this information has been helpful.